Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. A lot of buzz about digital disruption in transportation over the last 5 years. What's it all about? We're going to learn a little bit about that and a little bit about several other things with our next guest. With me, I've got Stefan Simonetti, partner at Kearney. Stefan, welcome to the Hot Seat.
Glad to be here, Spencer. Thanks.
Hey, so we're going to heat things up a little bit here, but before we do that, would you just take 30 seconds or so, tell us a little bit about Kearney and the work that you're doing over there for the firm?
Yeah, so Kearney's a global management consulting company. We've been around really for, almost 100 years now. We're global. We've got about 4,000 consultants that work around the world, and then here in North America, kind of scattered across the country. And we're a full service firm, so we work in all aspects of helping businesses across industries and across call it services, right? Operations, strategy, people and change, that sort of thing. I'm specifically in our travel and transportation group, and I spend all my time in transportation. So, my experience there over the last decade has been up and down the transportation value chain from international and forwarders and all the way through road freight and our kind of core markets here domestically, and so I've really kind of worked across those spaces, and Kearney specializes in having some real deep knowledge there. And I'd say our work is split up about 50-50 between work with core called strategic clients, big corporate clients, that sort of thing, and then also quite a bit with financial sponsors and in kind of the M&A space, helping with services there as well.
Yeah, so just for the benefit of our audience, let's talk about the work that you're doing for the corporate sponsors, because I think that's where we're going to find quite a bit of the intersection of the Tenney Group in Kearney. So can you kind of elaborate on that just a little bit more before we dive into these other topics?
Yeah, so for our M&A work, we work on both, call it buy side and sell side work. So we work on a lot of diligence work to begin with many of these companies. Thinking about what does their strategy look like, what does their business look like, and helping investors think about these assets and how they should make their investment. And then sell side would be similar, working with how folks bring their assets to market, and then that can extend. And as we get into more kind of corporate type situations, that extends into strategy and thinking about how they should go to market with those services after maybe a transaction occurs, and then all the way through like the operational elements and transformation of the business if that's the right thing for them.
Well, obviously, just a tremendous resource for our network within this podcast. So can't wait to dive in. So let's just do that. So I teased it in our intro here in terms of the digital disruption. So quite a roller coaster ride over the last 5 to 7 years. A lot of disruption, but from your vantage point, you're kind of in the thick of it, doing a lot of different things. Where are we right now as it relates to digital brokering and just the whole space?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of the work that I do actually is with these digital trends, right, and the digitization of the space. So yeah, it's a great question. I think back to really, I think when the ELD mandates came out, right around 2016, I think that's been kind of the start of this cycle. There were a lot of rumors at the time about Uber getting into the space. I think Convoy had just been founded. Tesla was toying around with a semi, and I think that was the beginning of this hype cycle, I think, or I'll call it a hype cycle, where we saw a lot of I think non-traditional folks looking into the transportation space and thinking there might be an opportunity here. Um, I think it's been kind of a mixed bag since then. A lot of the outsiders that tried to enter, I think, found out how tricky this space can be and how much knowledge it requires to operate well here. And I think in a lot of senses it's kind of under-delivered to what maybe folks thought when Uber stepped into the space. But I think at the same time, it's really started to bring our carriers forward, bring a lot of the transportation players forward. The amount of data we're getting off of ELDs and location services, clearly telematics and TMSs have been around for a long time, but I think that's really now come into the 21st century. And so you see what I see when I work with carriers is a willingness now to think about digital capabilities in their business, how they might think about transforming their business, how they might think about just using all this data now that they're getting off of their telematics system, their ELDs, their EDS, their load feeds, everything else, right? And Yeah, I think we're starting to see the maybe a generational shift within the industry. But that said, I think the big splash the big consolidation and a lot of the things that we might have heard about maybe called 7 years ago, 10 years ago, that this might be the beginning of a completely new industry. I'm not sure that we've quite kind of hit that mark.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, we've talked about it several times on this podcast, kind of the wild, wild west as it relates to venture capital, specifically within freight tech. And so, you know, going back the last 9 months, it's a little bit different environment, prior to the prior 36 months. And so,
Yeah.
where do you see this right now as far as like overall activity? You know, where do you think we are as the trends evolving in terms of M&A, but also just overall technology evolution?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, we do about half our work with financial sponsors, so we see that kind of deal flow, and I think we have a pulse from that perspective of how many deals are actually making it to a diligence, right? That's a big part
Right.
of it, and what we're kind of hearing about. And then we also, have dealt, especially in the last couple of years, more deeply in venture capital and kind of understanding who the startups are out there and watching the funding that's going on, because that's really critical to our, a lot of our corporate partners and to many of the fleets out there trying to take advantage of the technology. Um, yeah, I think you hit it right on. I mean, I think Q4 of last year, Q1 of this year, things slowed down pretty tremendously. We saw quite a hot market, right, in 21 and 22. And the folks I talked to really kind of hit the brakes as they went into late last year and then this year, trying to figure out what's going on with rates and the economy and are we going to hit a recession or not. I will say just kind of end of this quarter, the last couple of months, we've really seen things start to pick back up again. I think there's a lot of call it dry powder out there. There's a lot of folks that are looking for an investment, right? And I think we're at that point, not unlike the real estate markets right now, where people are trying to get the valuations to kind of level out with where the rates are at and where the investors' heads are at. And so I think the market might be finding a little bit of a new equilibrium. I think the Fed's minutes yesterday or the day before saying we might be heading into a recession later this year. That could again slow things down a little bit, maybe more than we were hoping. But for the moment, things seem to be getting a little bit faster, picking back up. I'd say what I'm hearing, especially in venture capital, whereas last year I think people were investing on an idea or a trend, we saw a ton going to AI investments for transportation and broadly, right? Now a lot of those early stage investors I'm talking to are looking for a little bit more, um, call it durable, maybe revenue, or maybe something they can take to the bank a little bit more in that sense. They're
Right.
also looking for a little bit more capital, call it capital efficiency or conservatism with capital. And I think they're thinking a lot more now about burn rates, right? And how long is that investment going to last, and are they going to be able to weather a storm that's not sure how far out it is, if it's there at all. So markets are picking back up for sure. Again, at
Yeah.
the moment, we're cautiously optimistic. I think that they'll stay like this.
It's funny you use the word capital efficiency. That's not a it's kind of an oxymoron in this in this industry. That is a difficult needle to thread sometimes,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
certainly understand the sensitivities around investors needing to see a little bit more resiliency as they continue to pour capital in investments. I mean, they're going to do it, as you just said. It's picking
yeah.
back up. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of hype, as you said,
Hmm.
but we just need a little bit more to take it to the bank. So speaking of the hype, you've seen a ton of technology platforms in the digital world. Where do you see returns on investments taking place right now within that world?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for practically speaking, for carriers, it's not so far out on the leading edge yet. Like I said, with that said, I think very practically, I see carriers and transportation players broadly recognizing that they do have a large pool of data now, and so they're able to apply some technologies to that pool of data. We think, or I think about these digital tools, these capabilities in kind of three layers. There's the information that's coming in, right? The pure data. Then you get to analysis and insights, and I think that's where a lot of the returns coming from now, and where a lot of the returns have come in the last 5 years. And there's really another layer above that, which is around action, right? Like explicit actions you can go take to kind of change the business, pivot, make a different operational decision. I think we're seeing a lot of return now. What was a really heavy data and information stream coming in before that wasn't really being utilized by the carriers and broadly the transportation players in the space. They're now realizing that with the supply chain crunch of the last 24 months, they need to start mining that data and at least understanding what's going on, creating visibility, creating analytics, deeper KPIs, more real time analytics on the networks and such. So I see it there explicitly. I mean, track and trace. If you think about where track and trace things were 5 or 10 years ago, I mean, we're light years ahead of that now, and I think that expectation is only continuing to grow. And I think that really helps hopefully bring down check calls and other sorts of things that we see inside carriers operations. I think one that's tangent to this that's maybe understated outside of our industry, but I think getting pretty well known inside is driver cameras and the ability to do kind of on demand coaching, right? And understand harsh braking events and things like that. I mean, we're seeing, I think, for a lot of fleets, big returns on that, and kind of holistically, both drivers, carriers, operators, everybody seems to be behind that technology and seem to be getting a lot out of it now. And so I really think it's about that block and tackling, and I think also from the shipper's perspective, they're looking at starting to get into more advanced optimizations. They're thinking more about how they can manage drop pools and trailer pools more efficiently. And I think those types of things really benefit the carrier as well when the shippers are able to action some of those, right? Spending less time at docks, running more miles, more efficient with efficiency in the fleet. I mean, I think that's really where the return is coming from today.
I'm curious. I really liked how you broke down kind of those three layers. One being just gathering the data, and two, the analysis of it, and then three, the actual activation of,
Yeah.
of that. And it kind of it seems like that is kind of a journey of maturation for the user, and just trying to figure out what that
Yeah.
is. And so I'm curious for the organizations. Maybe it's a carrier, maybe it's a shipper. What are the characteristics of the organizations that are getting that capital efficiency, their investment into this digital space? I mean, what do the organizations look like that are getting the gathering, the analysis, and the activation around all that? Because it's a process. I mean, that's not something that you just get good at overnight just because you now have the technology. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think it's before the technology even, you need a mentality, right? You need a little bit of a culture, you need a mindset shift to get into this. I think the transportation industry has always relied on its talent and its kind of ability to work harder than I think everybody else to get things done and get the shipments delivered on time or whatever it might be, right? And I think when you're starting to think about digital tools, the organization needs to take a little bit more of a, we'll call it, innovative perspective, right? You need to be prepared to think about the operations a little bit differently. You need to be prepared to make a little bit of an upfront investment, right? So you do need to put some capital up. So you need to be really focused on the business case and what I would say are the specific even use cases. Like, what are the activities, the workflows, the actions, the things my people are doing that I want to eliminate with a tool, or I want to change with a tool to deliver more value for my business, my customer, whatever it might be. So I think when they have that very targeted mindset on what they're trying to shift, they really understand the business case around it, and they really understand the kind of the incentives for the team to make this transformation. I mean, those broadly are the characteristics that I think we see in organizations that are successful using digital tools. Like you said, if you just bring a new tech in without a lot of these other kind of, call it, broader change and change management
Right.
considerations, we've seen a lot of those fall down. Or what ends up happening is you end up kind of trying to shape the technology to just fit the old workflow, the old way of doing things, and a lot of times it kind of reverts back to the old way, and you'll lose most of the benefit. You spend a lot of cash up front, and I think that's where carriers feel burned by technology, because or any folks in this industry end up feeling burned by technology. You have to meet it with process, with people. It can't just be about the tool.
Um, there was an article your firm put out at the end of December, and I'm trying to remember the title of it. It was really good. It said something about uh, uh, supply chain resiliency. How M&A is basically how to future proof your supply chain. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's to your point about like some of the mindset. Some of these people know that like that's never going to be us. That like we know that's not our DNA. And so
Yeah.
is part of, or at least one of the themes of that article talks about how folks are both on the shipper side and on the carrier side acquiring to build out the things of that their competencies, whether it be on the supply chain on the digital side, because they know that they're never going to get there
Yeah.
from a homegrown strategy. Like, so tell us about where you're seeing that right now, where you're seeing folks that are going out and solving problems via M&A to address specifically resiliency.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably a few cases. I think, first of all, we see kind of call it corporate venture capital arms that are out there, right, trying to make investments early on and look to do, to make some early moves and kind of get their eye on the ball on some of these technology plays early on. For example, an interesting one would be Ryder's early investment in Baton, which they then transacted on to fully acquire a couple of months ago, right? So you can see that they're looking at that technology, they're thinking about optimization and trucking, and then they go and they make that market move to pull that tech in because I think they think it'll get them kind of to the finish line a little bit more quickly with some advanced tech, right? To build on top of all the stuff that they do. That's one example. You might see it as well with some of the LTL acquisitions that are going on now, thinking a little bit differently about it. But you can see carriers trying to diversify their portfolio of services, right? I mean, LTL being a more concentrated base with maybe a little more control over your pricing. So thinking not just about pure truckload and dedicated, but what other services can be brought into the portfolio. I think technology has a role there. I think service offerings have a role there. I think there's a lot of different things to think about with the resiliency, but um, that information layer, as I talked about, that analytics layer, I think that helps with kind of the core fundamentals of resiliency. And then you can go, make these targeted acquisitions or maybe bigger acquisitions to bring new capabilities into the business and really, get a higher value out of it.
I love that. So let's talk about the future. And then I'm fascinated just by in terms of the lens of which you see our industry. So
Yeah,
you look at a lot of technology. So what are when you think about technology, what's coming next? Like, what's the
yeah,
next thing that we should potentially be having our eye on? Folks in our network should be aware of. What do you see?
yeah. I think. Look, I think there's still a long way to go. If we think about the three layers again, I still think there's a long way to go in the analytics layer, and there's a lot of folks that haven't gotten there yet. But I do see now really, I think, call it ruggedized and commercialized solutions coming to that insight layer, or the action layer, or the activity layer at the top. And I think that's really the next frontier. Um, I think maybe we're kind of out of this current hype, and maybe actually, if you think about it, AI is in that same hype kind of the next hype cycle, if you could, right? Because that AI piece is going to start to take the data and the analytics and think about it in the context of the business or even a specific operator and bring them to the next level. I think the AI piece is actually quite a ways off, but there are other, I think very viable solutions that play in that space. Kearney has a subsidiary by the name of HopTech that plays in fleet dispatch optimization. And there, we're taking from the kind of old way of thinking about optimization, which is pretty in a vacuum. It's kind of you start the day with an optimization, and then you let your operations team run on top of it and take it apart and fix it all day long while you're making your dispatches. Here, Kearney Stool is actually staying up to date, up to pace with the network and making real time dispatches, very much the way an operations team normally would, right? And so you're seeing that because of cloud computing, because of all these technologies that are coming into play now, we're actually able to make actions and make real time recommendations to fleets, to carriers that are kind of highly thought out, right, and very much in real time. And I think that pragmatically is going to be the next thing that starts to shake this up and brings maybe a leg up to the carrier base. And I think longer term, we've got our eye on things like AI. I think there will be targeted use cases for that, but it's going to take a while in this industry probably. And then even further out, we can start to think about autonomous, right? And folks like Kodiak, right, are running some autonomous commercial loads right now. There are folks out there running that, but I don't think that's the thing that's going to shake things up in the next, call it 5 to 10.
All right, one last question for you, Stefan. A little bit of a wild card here. So I know you're a Michigan guy. Uh, at least you were there for a bit. So I'm just saying,
Yep.
you go back in time and you have the opportunity to either hire Jim Harbaugh or John Harbaugh? Who's your guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got to go with Jim Harbaugh for sure. I think he's proven it out so far. So I'm keeping my my chips with that one.
I think he's done pretty well, and as have you, sir, in the hot seat. Certainly taking some heat, taking some tough questions, but fascinating insights. And I really appreciate you spending time with our network here today. So that's going to do it for us in the hot seat. We'll see you next time.